You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. MacAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Kate Andersen Brower. Now, if you've heard her name more than once, it's because she came on the podcast a couple of years ago with our friend and her friend, Pete Seat. Remember that for your White House books and First Ladies?
Yeah.
Kate is the author of #1 bestsellers, The Residents and First Women. She is a CNN contributor and covered the Obama administration for Bloomberg News. She is a former CBS News staffer and Fox News producer. She has written for the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and the Washington Post. She has come back on the Leaders and Legends podcast most graciously to discuss her new book, Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon. Thank you, Kate, so much.
Thank you, Robert, for having me again. It's nice to see you.
Well, I was born in 1967. My mother was born in 1938. So it was an Elizabeth Taylor household. I couldn't put your book down. It's not, as I said before we got started, it's not usually the thing I would pick up. But the one question I want to start with, and maybe this is an unfair question, but you know her probably as well as her kids do now. If you could come back, reincarnated, and live the exact same life that Elizabeth Taylor lived, Kate, would you do it?
100% yes.
Despite everything, despite 8 marriages and multiple health issues, that jewelry and that start, you just couldn't.
How can you resist that? I think she had a magnificent life, and I think she enjoyed her life. I mean, it's a joyful existence, but also there are layers of loneliness and, substance abuse and never really finding that one true love. But I think she lived her life so passionately, and and who wouldn't want to live on a yacht for several years, if we're being honest.
Have a place in Switzerland and then have a place in
all over.
This is a bit of a departure for you, I think, and just in terms of the subject matter. Most of your histories have been, I don't know if they're politically based, but certainly in that area. Mm-hmm. How did this book come to be?
It came about kind of in a strange, circuitous kind of way. I started talking to my husband, actually, as I was wrapping up my book, Team of Five, and trying to figure out a topic that would be interesting, but not too political. I'm always interested in writing about women. I'm interested in writing about one person and really diving in, doing a deep dive into their life. And so my husband said, he went to UVA and he loved John Warner. And he said, why don't you try to talk to John Warner about her life? Like, he's a Virginia Republican senator. He was retired at that point, and he was her sixth husband. And so I reached out to Senator Warner, got to know him, interviewed him several times at his house, which is like 20 minutes from my house. And he put me in touch with Elizabeth's kids, with her son, Chris. She had 4 kids. And Chris put me in touch with the trustees of her estate. I flew out to LA, met with them, and they said, we're looking for someone to write a book about her life, actually. And
really?
So it just worked out perfectly. And they are lovely people. I would say the only thing, there are 3 trustees. It's her lawyer, her longtime assistant, and then her grandson. And they're just wonderful people, but they're very, to different degrees. It took them a time to really want somebody to write a warts and all biography because they
knew that part was coming. They knew that part was coming.
Yeah. And it's Elizabeth Taylor. So even she talked about going to the Betty Ford Center, and, you've got Michael Jackson, you've got all these divorces and breakups and everything. You can't overlook the tragedy in her life.
I had the pleasure of interviewing this fella named Christopher Andersen. And we've not posted that podcast yet, but we will. And Christopher Andersen is Kate's father, who's written a number of books. And we were talking for just a second before we hit record about his role and what he does and his encouragement in pushing you and supporting you for your literary career. And I just have to ask you about it because he was such an incredibly delightful man, conversationalist interview. It was a complete joy to interview him.
Oh, well, he really enjoyed talking to you, and he's a great, supporter of mine and of anybody who wants to get into journalism. I was telling you earlier before we started recording that I don't know if I would have been brave enough to try this profession if it weren't for him, because it is tricky. There's some years where you're not doing as well. Anyone who's self-employed knows this. It's a roller coaster ride. Some books sell better than others. Some deals fall through, and you just have to keep moving forward. And so he taught me a lot about that perseverance and not getting too excited about anything great or too down about anything not working out. And then just having him home was so nice. So I hope I do that for my kids too.
He wrote a book. Mr. Andersen wrote a book on King Charles III that we discussed in a podcast interview. He's going over there for the coronation. And I begged him, if he needed an assistant, take me. I'll get coffee. I was a private in the Army. I'll get coffee. I'll sweep up. I'll vacuum, dust, whatever.
Well, I'm first in line for that spot. So yeah, it'll be awesome.
One of the other first questions I thought of before we get into the book's contents per se, and that is, and it's kind of a joke question, but it's kind of like, I really wonder, how did you choose which photograph to put on the cover and which photographs to include in your book? There's several amazing photographs, but if you Google Elizabeth Taylor photos, you can just get lost. There are so many incredibly beautiful pictures of her. And when I saw the picture you put on the cover, which is a very pretty picture, but it's an understated picture, I'm guessing there was a reason for that. Anyway, that seemed to be to me, like that would be one of the hardest aspects of writing a book on Elizabeth Taylor, is choosing which pictures to use.
Yeah, the photos inside the book are, I really, because she's so famous, tried to choose photos people hadn't seen before. So they're photos from this archive that her family had. So a lot of them haven't been seen before. There's a great photo of her cooking in the kitchen with her, hair up. She looks not like the Elizabeth Taylor you imagine. And then the cover photo was actually presented to us by HarperCollins. They have, a graphics design, an art department and all of that. And this really creative, talented woman, Robin Villardello, there came up with it. And I love it because it looks like she's about to speak to me. It looks like she's just about to say something. And the photo was taken in the early 60s, and Eddie Fisher is actually standing next to her. So we cut him out because she was he was her least favorite husband. She called him Edna for the rest of her life.
I'm going to ask you about that later on, because I have a note here that says Eddie Fisher. To me, what's my note? Eddie Fisher is truly the only villain in the book.
Yeah, he was.
Unless I'm missing one.
No, he was a bad guy. I mean, yeah, because even, Michael Jackson and the sort of the more controversial stories in the book, there's sort of nuance to that. It's that, he felt she never believed the allegations against Michael Jackson, and they were both bonded as child stars. And so it's more complicated. With Eddie Fisher, she just thought he was using her, and then he was abusive. I mean, at one point he held a gun to her head. So he was so upset about her affair with Richard Burton and just felt like he owned her. And when she almost died of double pneumonia, she left him because she realized, she had to live her life to the fullest after that. But I think that, yeah, he's the only villain.
We should note here for our Leaders and Legends podcast audience that Eddie Fisher left his wife, Debbie Reynolds, to marry Elizabeth Taylor after her husband, Michael Todd, was killed in a plane crash. And this is the late 50s.
Yeah.
So Eddie being a little jealous about Richard Burton is somewhat juicy.
You really, at the beginning of the book, I put a whole, list of husbands, lists of children, time period. So Eddie Fisher, she was married to from 59 to 64. Richard Burton, 64 to 74. 75 to 76. I mean, her love life was one man after another. And I think she just sought solace in these relationships. And I mean, I think she also wanted somebody to help her with the business of being Elizabeth Taylor, like someone to support her and to be there for her. She never found it.
My parents were married and divorced from each other twice, and we used to call them Liz and Dick.
Wow, you don't hear that every day.
Even though their names were Anna and Jack or John, we used to make fun of them and say, Liz and Dick, you getting married again?
Did they stay together the second time?
Hell no. They lasted about as long as Liz and Dick did the second time.
Yeah.
I read online that you had access to more than 10,000 photographs. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they had a tremendous amount of photos and letters and connections. I mean, I interviewed more than 250 people for this book because of the trustees. I mean, this is the first book that I've ever done with a family and with cooperation. So it's tricky, right? Because you want to tell a true story and like I said, a warts and all unvarnished look at her, but you also have to kind of tread lightly. Like, I was talking to and working with Mike Todd's grandson, who, strongly feels that Mike Todd was one of the great loves of her life, right?
Certainly,
and, then you have Richard Burton's adopted daughter who feels that he was the love of her life. So it's a very, I think, complicated thing when you're dealing with so many different relationships.
And you do a good job of splitting that baby in the book. It seems like she vacillates. Oh, I'd still be married to Mike Todd. But then, she's, as it comes through in your book on Elizabeth Taylor, she's like secretly wanting to marry Burton a third time.
Yes, I think they would have gotten married a third time. And it was a really hard conversation I had with Sally Burton, who was Richard's final wife, who still holds such animus towards Elizabeth because, she wouldn't let Elizabeth come to to Richard's funeral. Mm-hmm. She felt like Richard's family always thought that Elizabeth was the great love of his life and not her. And at a certain point, I think you can see her perspective. She is his final wife, and she felt as though Elizabeth had this hold on him, like she owned him. But still, I thought decades later, she would have kind of moved past some of that, but the resentment is still very fresh there between Sally Burton and I guess the ghost of Elizabeth Taylor.
One of the other things that came through your book so strongly was Elizabeth's, I call her Elizabeth like we're BFF, so forgive me. Oh. Elizabeth's sense of charity and giving back. I'll ask you about the AIDS work here towards the end of the interview. But before then, she was a very giving, loving, caring, empathetic, generous person.
Yeah, I mean, she adopted Maria. She had 4 kids, and she felt strongly. 3 she gave birth to, and she really wanted to adopt. And she went to a orphanage. She met a bunch of children, and at one point she was introduced to Maria, who was a baby at the time, and she fell in love with her. And one of the people working at the orphanage said, no, you don't want this baby. She's got a problem with her hip. She's going to need surgeries. And Elizabeth said, no, that's absolutely the child I want. She gravitated towards people who were in trouble. And, Montgomery Clift, I think there's a beautiful story about how she protected him after this tragic car accident where he was known, this beautiful actor, this gay man who she really fell in love with. And I think if he had been straight, she would have married him. I mean, and he was just so handsome, and he gets into a car accident that disfigures his face. And the accident was after he had a dinner at her house, and she runs up to him. Her white silk dress is, stained with his blood. He's choking on his own teeth, and she's reaching in and pulling them out. And then she shields him with her body when the paparazzi comes and says, if you ever, if I see any photo of this in the press, you're never getting another picture of me ever again. And I think that's really beautiful because she's threatening them and knowing that it would be so devastating to Monty, who she called him Monty, if photos of his face after this awful accident were released. And so she stood up for people in big and small ways throughout her life.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Kate Andersen Brower, #1 New York Times best-selling author. We are discussing her new book, Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon. Let's start perhaps at the beginning for a little bit quickly. She's born in England. Her parents are relatively prominent. I mean, they're not royalty, but they're prominent. They moved to the United States in, I think, 38 or 39 because the war clouds over Europe. Matter of fact, I think even, isn't it Joseph Kennedy tells Elizabeth's dad, get out, like now's the time to move. Mm-hmm. Her mom was a Christian Scientist. Elizabeth was brought up that way and eventually converted to Judaism, which I'll ask you about later. They moved to the United States, settled in Hollywood or Los Angeles. And the rest is, quote unquote, history. How did she get started in films? And what were those early years like? Because they seem to have shaped her rebellious nature, even as she got older.
Well, she got into films because of her mother. And her mother was a moderately successful stage actress named Sarah Southern. And her mother was a social climber and, very typical stage mother. And Elizabeth had a brother who was very attractive too. And her mother tried to get him into movies. And the day of his audition, he shaved his head so that he wouldn't get it. He hated it. He hated the idea. And Elizabeth loved that about her brother, that he just wasn't interested in it. Elizabeth's father, Francis, was related to a successful art dealer. And so he got into the art business. And so he did very well. Elizabeth was raised upper middle class to upper class, but her parents disagreed about what to do in terms of getting her into show business. And Sarah went out. She was very willed. And, that led to a separation for a period of time between Elizabeth's parents because of this feeling that Francis had that he had to make it a man if he wanted to see his daughter.
He is a bit player in your book that comes out. I mean, he parachutes in and then he's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so in the book, I write for the first time about his being physically abusive to Elizabeth, and that had never been reported before, that he he felt as her career progressed, and so she was 12 in National Velvet, and she became a household name, and she's making so much more money than her dad. And he got really angry at her and would hit her violently. She said she had lockjaw the rest of her life, she would say, because of her father beating her. And so he felt, not to justify what he did, but I think he felt very deeply frustrated. But she got into the business strangely because of him. It was her mother, Sarah, who was the driving force. But Francis, her father, was an air warden, which is just strange to me, but I guess going back to World War II and Beverly Hills. So he would be patrolling the neighborhood, and he had a friend who worked at one of the big studios, and he got an audition for Elizabeth. And I go into the book about how it all came to be. And eventually she gets a deal with MGM, which is after she has a deal that kind of goes nowhere for a period of time. And then she gets to MGM, and at MGM is where her career really flourishes. And she becomes, this commodity really made by the studio. Back then, the studio system controlled your entire life, who you could date. She went to school on the studio in a little schoolhouse. I interviewed Margaret O'Brien, who's one of the last stars of that era, and she described Elizabeth bringing her chipmunks to the schoolhouse and how lonely it was for her. I mean, there were a dozen kids at a time going to this school, very strict teacher. And Elizabeth talks about, here you are. She was the only kid in her grade, no peers, and then she would be treated like a child by the teacher, and then she would go have a romantic scene for a movie and have to make out with Robert Taylor, and it just did tricks on her mind. I think it was very difficult for her.
But she rebelled quickly, even as, I would say, not a young child, but perhaps a teenager, against this oppressive Hollywood studio system.
She did. And she confronted L.B. Mayer and Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, this feared mogul who controlled the biggest, studio at the time. And she went into his office and he was yelling at her mom. And she said, you can't talk to my mom like that. How dare you? Storms out of the room. And everyone says, Elizabeth, you have to go in and apologize to him. She was 16 at the time. And she said, no, they'll never fire me. So I'm not going to. I'm right and he's wrong. And she never went into his office again after that. She never apologized to him. And she never was fired because she made them so much money. And she says that's when she learned this very cynical lesson, that that's all she really was to them, was a moneymaker. They didn't care. They gave her a bunch of crummy roles that she didn't want, but she had to do. She was this commodity made out of tinsel and cellophane, she used to say, and that's how they treated stars back then.
National Velvet came out, I think, is it 47, 49?
I have my list.
Late 40s, I know.
Yes. It came out actually in 44.
44, that early. Mm-hmm. So then she has several years after that to grow up. She starts to get bigger movie roles, or more adult movie roles is perhaps the best way to say it. But she does something quickly, almost as soon as she can, to help assert her independence. And what was that ill-fated decision, marriage to Nikki Hilton?
Yeah, I mean, I would say her first big role there's a bunch of, she jokes, the studio handed me a bunch of crap, basically. And she did do some bad films. She definitely did. But, sprinkled in there is a Little Women and Father of the Bride. But her first big film was George Stevens in 51 with A Place in the Sun. And George Stevens and she, this famous director, had a really fascinating relationship. She didn't like him much, but he gave her a lot of opportunities, including in Giant. But she married Nikki Hilton, and George Stevens later would say that she married Hilton and had all these successive marriages because it was the only way women of that era in the 50s could have any freedom. Strange, which is a strange thing to say, but a woman like Elizabeth, who, was so conflicted, she was not, she was still a teenager when they got married. I think she saw becoming someone's wife as a means of escape from this life that she had. So she was, Mrs. Nikki Hilton, Mrs. Michael Wilding, and she would try to kind of transform herself into what that person wanted. And then she would see that she never really could escape from this life.
It seems like she went from prison to jail.
Yeah.
Do you agree with George Stevens, who won 2 Oscars for Best Directing? I mean, he was a titan during the mid 20th centuries, that Elizabeth was seeking these things. She clearly wanted to control more of her own money. That comes through, more of her own life. And she thinks that jumping from one institution, which is childhood, basically, to another, marriage, would give her that freedom. Is it fair to say she miscalculated, or she just chose the wrong guy to marry the first go round?
Yeah, I think she chose the wrong guy the first go round. But she made up for that when she married Mike Todd. And, Michael Wilding, after Nikki Hilton, was physically very violent, huge alcoholic. She tells a story about how they got into a fight and she was pregnant and he kicked her and she lost the baby. I mean, the whole relationship was just a nightmare from the word go. And her parents loved the idea of her marrying into the Hilton family because it's part of their social climbing, right? But she stands up for herself. They were married for less than a year. And she says she wasn't going to take it, even though her parents really didn't support her leaving that relationship back there in 1950, 51, you're getting a divorce. That's a big deal. And then I found this memoir that her mother had written that was never published, where she says, Elizabeth's mother says, we were told that Nikki had problems. And at one point he needed to be put into a straitjacket and that he would kill her. And I'm reading that and you just think, well, why would you ever then want her to marry this guy? Like, they were told that before they got married. So it's kind of social climbing at its worst.
He amounted to basically nothing.
Yeah, he ended up dying. I'm not sure if it was suicide or what it was, but he was in his, I think, 30s or 40s. I mean, really young when he passed away.
She then marries Michael. We could do a podcast on each one of these marriages, or a podcast only about her marriages. But she marries. The reason I mentioned Michael Wilding, who was British, is that she had 2 kids by him, 2 boys.
2 boys, yeah.
2 boys. And they were and that's my segue into asking you how helpful they were to you writing your book, because you quote them at length several times in your biography. And I thought it was fascinating that they would be so open with you. Really, it's a compliment to you. Thank you.
I mean, Chris is one of the reasons why I ended up doing this book. He is very thoughtful, and he's a great writer. And we would talk on the phone and he would say, let me think about that. And then he would send me an email that was just amazing, with exactly these kind of tormented thoughts, I think, at times, like everyone has about their parents. I think you have difficult times. And if a parent is that famous, it was fascinating to get into his head a little bit writing about her, because he would, he talked about, to me, the hardest thing is talking about her addiction. And he was so upfront about it. He described her sitting on the edge of a bed when he was in his early 20s, and she was married to John Warner and they're living in Georgetown. And she said, can you come up to the bedroom? He comes up to the bedroom and she's sitting there with a syringe of Demerol and she wants him to plunge it into her thigh. And he says, Mom, I'm just not going to do that. And she did it herself in front of him. And to watch your mom inject herself with these painkillers that were really, I mean, they didn't kill her in the end, but there were many times when she said she could have died and ended up like Marilyn Monroe. But yet I still think there were so many dark days in her life, but the joy outweighs the darkness. And that's why I say I wouldn't mind coming back. It's not all depressing.
Her third husband is Michael Todd. She clearly was head over heels for him. he dies in a plane crash. And I don't have the chronology in front of me. Is it later in the 50s, 57 or
57? They get married in 57 and he dies in 58. So they're married for about 13 months and they have a daughter together.
And, when I saw your book the first time at the Barnes and Noble, I picked it up. Of course, I went right to the pictures because, I'm sure I don't have to explain that. But then I looked at I wanted to read about the Michael Todd death and not only how she reacted, but how the people for whom she worked reacted to her. Because I would have to guess that one day receiving that news more than anything else was the single worst day of her life.
And I think, like Jackie Kennedy, who I've written about before, I think she had PTSD the rest of her life because reading this 24-hour, sequence of events where she's supposed to go with Mike, who is this, for people who don't know, this super producer, very famous. I did Around the World in 80 Days, larger than life personality, and she truly adored him. There's a great interview that Edward R. Murrow does with them where, you could just see how just the magnetism between them. But she finds out that he died in this plane crash. She was supposed to be on the plane with him. And, she's left alone with 3 kids. She's, I believe, 26.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, how old was she? Yeah.
Yeah. And she's in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof at the time, trying to figure out, she needs the money because she has this huge lifestyle too. I mean, she needed the money because she needed to finance the assistants and the private schools for the kids and this whole life.
She needed the money because she needed to spend it.
Yeah. I mean, she was Elizabeth Taylor. She was, and she sold the diamond ring that Mike Todd gave her that she used to call her skating ring. So she did make sacrifices. But just the trauma of that. And Shirley MacLaine talked about, coming and seeing Elizabeth at their house and how, the news just shook her, that she just could not function as anyone would feel for a period of time. And on the set of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, there was a touching moment where Burl Ives, who played Big Daddy, they had all this fake food on the table for a scene, but Elizabeth hadn't eaten anything for days. This is a few weeks after Mike Todd's death. And so the director said, we're going to put out real food this time and everyone eat. And Elizabeth just ravenously was eating because they were worried about her. They thought she was, she went through periods, I think, of being suicidal. And she said if it weren't for her kids, she didn't want to be around anymore.
Is there a better on-screen, more attractive pairing ever in Hollywood history than Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof?
No, those eyes. I mean, both of them just incredible. And you don't get, And it's interesting that Paul Newman's memoir is out almost at the same time too. And he writes in that memoir about visiting Elizabeth and talking to her after Mike's death. And I love it because it was something where he said, I said, this is God's plan or God's will. And she said, oh, go to hell, and that was her. She was just brash and not phony. And that's what drew me to her.
You mentioned a movie a few minutes ago that I have to, in honor of my Hoosierdom, go back. And that is Giant, which co-starred Fairmont, Indiana's own James Dean. That movie, I remember watching it. I mean, it's 63 days long. It's so long, but I remember watching it as a kid with my mother, and my mother going on and on because we didn't know, she didn't know that Rock Hudson was gay. And I can remember her just fawning over him, but Hollywood knew it. Elizabeth knew it. What was the relationship like both between Elizabeth and Rock and Elizabeth and James Dean, who died, I think, before the movie was even done? Because I think I read correctly that she still had to do reaction shots based on what James Dean was saying in the movie after he was killed or after he died in the car crash.
which was so painful for her because she loved James Dean. And she was just completely crushed. There was kind of a love triangle between the three of them. They were in Marfa, Texas, this tiny town, and James Dean, Rock Hudson, and Elizabeth stayed in these little bungalow houses, and they would go after they were done shooting and hang out with each other. But Rock and made these martinis that Elizabeth talks about a lot. She loved to reimagine those days. And when Rock was dying of AIDS later on in the 80s, she would often talk about just the joy that she had with these two men who didn't like each other. I mean, Rock was very jealous of James Dean, which, and then when James Dean dies, he's like, he was beating himself up because he didn't want him to die. But he was not, I think he felt like he was being upstaged.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think he might have been in some cases, because James Dean, I mean.
Well, he was just like a rocket's red glare there in the 50s.
Yeah.
And she her attitude and her feelings and behavior with regard to Rock, when reading that in your book, Rock Hudson, that's what cemented to me the sense that she's got so much love to give. And it's a shame she can't find it in her marriages, because then she goes to look for it in other places, not falsely, but because that's just her nature.
Yeah. I mean, she joked that sometimes you don't fry the fish you want to fry. I don't think that Rock Hudson was someone she would have married, but they did have a lot of fun together. But I think Montgomery Clift, definitely, they would have gotten married if I think they had some sexual tension between them, but he was gay and she knew it. And so I think for her, like you said, it does feel like she constantly is trying to find that one person. And I think it was Richard. But then I think so. But then the alcohol, it was Chris Wilding, Elizabeth's son. We were talking about how helpful he was on this book. And he said it so well. He said, I asked him if they knew that his mom was an alcoholic. And he said, it's hard to pay attention to a barbecue when there's like a dumpster fire right behind it. This house was engulfed in flames and no one was looking at mom, because Richard was so, he would go to a bar, and if there was a glass half full on the bar, he would drink a stranger's glass. I mean, he was drunk a lot, and he could turn really mean. And I think that's what kind of undid their.
And there were a lot of British actors in that time period who did their thing. You can listen to Peter O'Toole talk about it, Richard Harris talking about it, all of them, about how they just drank their way through the 60s and 70s. You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast, presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest is Kate Andersen Brower, author of a terrific biography, Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon. You mentioned sexual tension between Elizabeth and some of her, I would say, gay male friends or co-stars. She had more than sexual tension with Frank Sinatra.
Yes, she had. She actually, was in a romantic relationship with him, and she did get pregnant, and he, strongly encouraged her to have an abortion, and she went to Mexico and had this abortion, and then, was obviously, it was very emotional and grueling for her. And I don't think she was ever able to kind of look at him the same way again. But there wasn't really an option for her, I don't think, back then to have the.
She was married, correct, at the time?
Yeah.
Was that when she's married to Michael Wilding?
Yeah, that's right. That's her Michael Wilding marriage. And the Michael Wilding marriage is very sad because Elizabeth kind of wanted a husband who could go toe to toe with her. And so there were a lot of relationships that were physically abusive, and Michael Wilding wouldn't do it, and
Mm-hmm.
she would hit him and want him to hit her back like Mike Todd did. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Burton. And she was bored by a gentleman. She just wasn't interested in it. And that is one of her undoings, I think, is that always like picking fights. And the same thing with John Warner years later. Like, this was never going to work out because he wasn't giving her that emotional gratification. It's like everything to her was, passion on stage had to be brought off stage, kind of thing.
Was there a particular husband? I think if I remember this correctly in your book, and I can't remember which husband it is, where she proclaims exalts the joy of makeup sex.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's Richard Burton, but it's probably all of them too. She and Richard, I mean, there was stuff in these letters between them where, it's very passionate, it's very raunchy, but it's very visceral and very real. This kind of like just this sense that they couldn't live with each other and couldn't live without each other. And I think it was just true love, but they couldn't get over the addiction side of both of their lives. Because when he stopped drinking, she was like, "You're kind of boring."
You say that in your book, you call it like when Richard is one of his dry periods, and she's like, "I don't want to even be around you." And you just think that's so counterintuitive.
It's like, I don't even know you like this, and I think that for some people, that's probably true. They were in this codependent, addictive relationship, and she would give him little bits of gin because he was going through withdrawal and shaking and nauseous and everything. And it's like, if you really want someone to quit drinking, it's hard to understand how you then give them alcohol. But for her, it was this compassion she had for him, and maybe a twisted little bit. She didn't give up drinking thing.
I want to bring up 3 movies real quick. We talked a little bit about National Velvet, and then A Place in the Sun, affirmed that Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor are the most beautiful couple ever to appear together on screen. Butterfield 8. She wins her first Oscar. She received 5 Oscar nominations, and she won twice. The first one for Butterfield 8. And Elizabeth Taylor in that white slip with the drink in her hand is one of the most iconic photos of the period. According to you, she didn't necessarily want to do the movie. I think it was her last movie that she had to do for MGM or something. So she just kind of did it. Was that movie a surprise for her in both how she was celebrated and found new respect among her peers? I mean, like all beautiful women, you have to fight extra hard to go like, okay, I get that you're looking at me, but watch me work. And do you think that really put her on a different level?
I think that the reason she got the Oscar is because of the tracheotomy. She had just had double pneumonia. The world had turned against her because she had broken up, supposedly, the marriage between Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, who was the golden couple at the time. And Shirley MacLaine even said at the time, "I lost to a tracheotomy." So Elizabeth didn't think she deserved Butterfield 8, for anyone who's seen it, it's really not a great film. She plays basically a prostitute. She thought it was the studio punishing her. It's kind of silly and over the top. She didn't think she deserved it. I mean, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is a much better performance and a fantastic movie. And then you get this. I mean, she hated the film, and she said there is no deodorant like sex, because once she won that Oscar, and once she was suddenly revered, whereas the Hollywood press loved her, and because she almost died. I mean, I think that's why people turned towards her instead of away from her, because there were times when no one would take her phone calls, when she was really considered poisonous after she broke up Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, even though she didn't really break up their marriage. It was already over.
She wasn't the Angelina Jolie of the time.
I mean, some people were just on Team Debbie or Team Elizabeth or Liz. She hated being called Liz, but people
They picketed outside her shows or movies or Eddie
Yeah.
Fisher's Las Vegas residencies.
I mean, that's what struck me the most was how much she had to deal with the sexism of the time and the idea that this sort of tawdry, slutty woman is going and stealing people's husbands. And it was always again and again the story of her life, you know. And then when she's with Richard Burton, the same thing happened, to the point where a member of Congress wanted to make sure she couldn't come back into the country. I mean, it was ridiculous, what people were saying about her. And, you know, but she was never apologetic about it. She said, you should love who you love. And I like that about her. She wasn't trying to get people's approval.
Richard Burton's daughter, Kate Burton, is one of my favorite actresses. I'd love to interview her on the podcast. She's absolutely terrific.
She's great. She's great. And she's wonderful talking about Elizabeth. You know,
I saw that in your book. That was my next question is, it wasn't just Elizabeth's kids you talked to. You know, Kate Burton is not is not Elizabeth Taylor's daughter, but still she was willing to talk to you and doesn't come off. And what I read is bitter or anything. It's almost matter of fact.
It's amazing, actually, that she could be so forgiving. I think it's partially because Richard's wife, Sybil, Kate's mom, remarried and had like a whole life afterwards, you know, and opened a nightclub in New York. And, you know, it wasn't like this brought down her mother's entire existence. And she tells a really funny story about how one night, you know, Elizabeth wanted to cook everyone dinner and the fire broke out in the kitchen. And Kate just said, you know, Elizabeth Taylor is not put on earth to cook you dinner. That's not her purpose. So I think that like she thought it was fun. And I think Elizabeth worked hard to kind of nurture that relationship with Kate, because Liza Todd was the same age as Kate Burton. So that could be very difficult, I think.
Next movie I want to mention is the first Elizabeth Taylor movie I ever saw. And as a 10 to 12-year-old boy, it was memorable in a lot of ways. And that was Cleopatra.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I was like, 10-year-old.
She looks a lot better in Cleopatra than she does in Who's Afraid. I was born in 1967. So when that movie kind of came on TV, again, my mother was a huge fan. We watched it. I just remember, one of the things I remember is it's Archie Bunker is the first one to stab Rex Harrison. It's the movie where Julius Caesar is assassinated on the Ides. The first person to draw his dagger is Carol O'Connor.
Wow. I've seen the movie, but I didn't know that. That's so interesting.
And I recognized him as a kid going, it's Archie Bunker. He's getting ready to kill that dude. Anyway, that movie was a host unto itself, to use Thomas Jefferson's description of Alexander Hamilton. It was a mess. It was controversial. It was ridiculously expensive. Elizabeth Taylor becomes the first male or female star to get a $1 million salary. Plus she got a percentage of the profits, I believe. But that's the movie where she meets Richard Burton. They had met before, but now he is her co-star, and it changed Hollywood forever. And I don't think that's an overstatement. Do you?
No, I mean, this is the first major celebrity couple. This is the couple who invented the paparazzi, really, Richard and Elizabeth, the first celebrity couple with their own nickname. Listen, now we're so used to celebrity, but at that point, there were a few golden ones, and she was one of the golden ones. And yeah, I mean, Cleopatra is not one of her finest films, but it is incredible that she was able to get $1 million for it. And she was going to walk away if she didn't get $1 million. And the first actor, male or female, to get that much money, that was groundbreaking. And it was also kind of like a message of, I know my value. I mean, we talk about that a lot now with women, and she always knew what she was worth and what she was bringing to the table. And she would have walked away. She loved the idea of playing Cleopatra, and it had been presented to her for years and years. But she hated the script. You know, they had to bring in Mankiewicz to redo the script, and the whole thing was a complete mess. And she wasn't happy with how it turned out, you know, but.
It's an epic to say the least, but describe for the Leaders and Legends audience how Liz and Dick became Liz and Dick.
Well, I think she was, gravitated towards Richard Burton because she thought, oh God, I have to play against this guy who's a famous stage actor and he's going to be such a jerk. And I've heard he sleeps with all of his leading ladies. And then on the first day of shooting, he's terribly hungover and he's just a mess. And his hands are shaking so badly that he can't bring a cup of coffee up to his lips. And she has to go in there and hold the coffee up for him. And they break it, they both hysterically are laughing, and it's this instant connection. So this man who she assumed would be a terrible snob is actually self-deprecating, great sense of humor, whip smart, just like she is. So sexy to her. I mean, just everything about his
that voice.
I mean,
I sent you that video of him playing tribute to Frank Sinatra, and you just are like, that voice is absolutely perfect.
It's amazing. And he is just, I mean, she liked a self-made man. He was from Wales. His father was a coal miner. He was one of several kids. They had very little money. His father was an alcoholic. This is not somebody who was born into this life. This was not Nicky Hilton. This is a kind of a rare talent who worked his way up in London theater. And so to Elizabeth, it was kind of like Mike Todd, who was actually, Jewish, and Elizabeth's parents were anti-Semitic. So she kind of was rubbing their nose in it, and she loved doing that. And I love that about her, that she liked these guys who were self-made.
And Mr. Eddie Fisher, her husband at the time, was not blind to what was happening.
No, and this is the time in Rome when he held a gun to her head and said, "You're too beautiful to kill. Don't worry. I won't shoot you." And so that's pretty traumatic. And she felt that she had to really escape from this life with Eddie. And she did it with Richard. And I think Richard, I write about too, felt very conflicted about leaving his wife and his two daughters, Kate Burton, and then she has a sister who had some health problems. So that was just compounding this guilt. He had a conscience. They felt bad about what they were doing to people's families, but they just couldn't, keep their hands off each other. It was actually truly passionate, real love. But it was just also tortured, and they fought a lot. And as their relationship progressed, it became kind of toxic.
The third film I want to mention to you came out in 1967. And that is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, in which Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor star in together. She, not him, wins the Academy Award for Best Performance, wins the Oscar. That movie, I've not seen it. I'm going to watch it as a result of reading your book. It seems absolutely fascinating. Was that the crowning triumph of her acting career? To play this dour, beat down. I mean, she looks like Mrs. Doubtfire in the damn film. She doesn't look like Elizabeth Taylor. To kind of do that, and it's interesting because there's a lot of female actresses, and I'm getting a little bit out of my lane, who are beautiful, go ugly, and then win an Oscar. Charlize Theron would be the first one I could think of, but there have been others. What did she think of this film and her performance?
This is her crowning achievement as far as acting goes. Virginia Woolf was, she read the script. She helped pick, immediately she knew she had to do it. She helped pick Mike Nichols, who had never directed a movie before. The whole thing is shot in black and white. And it's like the most uncomfortable thing to watch because it's just these people fighting with each other, and it's just brutal, but it's very honest. And she ages herself by more than a decade. She gains weight. And I think for her, it was this big challenge and nobody thought she could do it. And there's this great letter that I found between Mike Nichols and one of the producers of the film. And they say, Richard is going to walk away with this. He's doing such a brilliant job. And that's what I loved is that. And then they say, Mike says, I'm worried about Elizabeth as Martha. I don't know how it's going. And I mean, she did win the Oscar and Richard didn't. And Richard was competitive. I think it was the alcohol, but it was also the competition between them. He wouldn't go to the Oscars. So she didn't go to the Oscars to get her Oscar that year.
Like Burt Reynolds and Sally Field.
Yeah, it kind of pisses me off because
you should be.
Yeah, it's like he should be. That if he had won and she didn't, she would have supported him. So over and over again, she's there for him and he's not always there for her. So I came away thinking that she loved him more than he loved her, or more than he was capable of loving anyone, really.
She was glamorous. She was beautiful at a time when Hollywood glamour was silly. I think you could say it was at its apogee in that time period. You mentioned in one of your paragraphs in your book, and we're talking to Kate Andersen Brower about her new biography of Elizabeth Taylor. And I'll put a link on the podcast description so that you can buy it off Amazon or wherever you choose. It is an absolutely wonderful book. It made me think of my mother the entire time because I know she would have loved to have read it. Sophia Loren, you describe her as Elizabeth thought her as of a rival. Did she have other rivals? Because when Elizabeth's basically at her peak, this young lady named Marilyn Monroe was basically at her peak. And did you get the sense, you talked about competition a few minutes ago, that there was competition, or at least Elizabeth felt certain women were in her league, or at least could be looked at the same way that she was? Sophia Loren being obviously one of the most beautiful women in the history of the world.
She definitely thought that Sophia and Richard Burton were sleeping together. Sophia was married to Carlo Ponti. I don't know. I know I was told that Richard and Raquel Welch had a fling. It seems as though Richard and Sophia Loren, it wouldn't be out of the question if they did, because they were shooting a film together and Elizabeth would talk about how they would speak in Italian around her, and it drove her nuts because she couldn't speak Italian. So yeah, I think that Sophia Loren is the closest thing to a rival that Elizabeth had, because I think Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth felt sorry for her. She saw that Marilyn didn't have the support structure that Elizabeth had, and didn't have the kind of the grounded feeling about herself that Elizabeth had. I mean, Elizabeth knew she was beautiful, knew she was smart. Marilyn didn't have a father when she was growing up who was there for her, didn't have a strong mother in her life. I mean, she was kind of thrown to the wolves. Elizabeth never had the casting couch experience because she was already famous by the time she was 12. She had her mother there all the time. I never heard a story about her, and I think she would have talked about it, have a producer or a director kind of make it unwanted advances. That was not, she would just like punch you if you did it, she knew that nobody would do that because she was already at that point. And Marilyn was kind of working her way up to it. So she said in this unpublished interview that I found in the archives, that she helped Marilyn, offered to walk out of the set of Cleopatra because Marilyn was being mistreated. And Marilyn said, no, you don't have to do that. And she just felt sorry for her, that she felt that and then Arthur Miller wrote a play about Marilyn, and there was talk of Elizabeth starring in the play as Marilyn after the fall, where it's really just negative kind of caricature. And Elizabeth was so pissed off because she's like, I would never do something like that to dishonor her, Marilyn Monroe's, the legend around this woman.
You have a wonderful anecdote. It's not really a story. It's an anecdote about the two most famous Elizabeths in the world, and how Queen Elizabeth II came to the aid of the Queen Elizabeth of Hollywood. Tell that story, because I think it's so funny.
I mean, so John Warner has met Elizabeth, escorting her to the British Embassy, 1976 bicentennial. There was a big party in DC, and Elizabeth was, someone needed to be there to keep her to be her date. And also to keep her kind of in check, because she was, you never knew with Elizabeth what she was going to do. And she was at this party and she tore the hem of her dress and she was yelling, oh my gosh. And Queen Elizabeth comes over to her and says, Elizabeth, darling, we'll get this fixed for you. Don't worry about it. And just the thought of this hubbub going on at the British Embassy, and John Warner just sitting there like, oh my gosh, trying to control Elizabeth Taylor, which you never could do.
And the Queen of England comes over and makes things better.
Yeah.
One of my ladies in waiting will take care of that.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a few minutes left on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Her time in Washington, D.C., when she was married to Republican Senator John Warner. Is it fair at all to characterize those as lost years?
No, I don't think I think that's unfair, because she learned a lot here. I mean, she learned how the levers of power work and how to get legislation passed, and the whole kind of relationship building and manipulation and all of that. I think she learned in Hollywood, but those years married to John Warner, although she hated it here, and she was never meant to be a supporting actor, and John Warner would just, keep her at home in their Georgetown mansion or in their Virginia farm, and she had nothing to do. That was not going to work for the biggest celebrity of the 20th century. And I don't know what he was thinking about that. But so she got, depressed, and she ate a lot, she drank a lot. But I think it was a formative time for her because it led to her AIDS activism.
And it's interesting because during this time, especially in the 80s, early, from 81 to 89, her friends are in the White House.
Yeah. I mean, the Reagans, she had been, in Hollywood at the same time. She was, not good friends with them, but certainly friendly. And she used that relationship to get what she wanted. And, I think it was also interesting that she's married to a Republican from Virginia. So she wasn't seen as, she was very liberal, but she could kind of play both sides. And I think she did that really smartly.
It's funny. I think there's a story in your book where she's talking to Ronald Reagan about it, and she's calling him Mr. President, Mr. President. And finally she just snaps and goes, Ronnie. I just thought that was so funny.
Yeah, she just, and that's what she did. She went to the Oval Office and flirted with him to get him to finally come to the Potomac dinner. The first cases of AIDS were in like 81. He didn't talk about it at length until 87. And that is because she kept hammering them. She was a co-founder of AMFAR. She was raised over $100 million for AIDS research. And she was so angry that they weren't talking about it because it was taking so many lives. And she used her personal charm to get him to come to this big dinner.
One thing that and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't read in your book, which is not that big a deal, but I thought it was funny only because it was such an 80s reference. And that is her love of General Hospital, the soap opera, and how she appeared on it when, we hadn't seen her in forever. Did she talk much about that? I mean, that seems to me like I'd love to know how that came about.
Yeah, I didn't put that in the book. I mean, she definitely, when I talked to Demi Moore, she was talking about how cool it was that Elizabeth did that, because Demi Moore was also in soap operas, and it made her feel validated that here this huge star would do it. But she loved watching. It was her guilty pleasure watching General Hospital, and she got the chance to do it. She didn't really do a lot of acting, in the 80s. I mean, her last film was The Flintstones, which is kind of an unfortunate last film in the 90s. She did These Old Broads, which was a TV movie that with Debbie Reynolds that Carrie Fisher wrote. I think she kind of pivoted very wisely. And I think she knew how ageist and sexist Hollywood is, that she was going to have to do something else. And I'm not saying that she did the AIDS activism as a way to keep herself entertained, but I think she saw something she cared about and she used all of her time with that. And then also as an entrepreneur, I mean, white diamonds, passion,
Sure.
one of the first giant, actually the most successful celebrity perfume at the time, and still actually selling, it's kind of incredible.
And came after, I think, did Sophia Loren do it first?
No, Zsa Zsa Gabor had a perfume.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing did anywhere near as well as Passion and White Diamonds. I mean, that's huge. And she wanted to do a makeup and kind of spin it out into all different things, but even Elizabeth Taylor couldn't convince them to do it. She wanted to do eye makeup.
You said the magic word, diamonds. You have almost a whole chapter, or maybe it's a whole chapter about her jewelry collection. Tell the Leaders and Legends podcast audience just how amazing and lucrative it was. Some of the pictures in your book, we've all seen most of us, or not all, who knows, a lot of us have seen the crown jewels in the Tower of London, and you're just gawking. And it seemed like she needed her own tower to hold her jewels.
I mean, it was the largest private jewelry collection in the world, matched only by Queen Elizabeth and other royal families. It sold for more than $150 million at Christie's. This combination of, the Krupp diamond, which was a 33 karat diamond that Richard gave her, the Peregrina pearl, one of the largest pearls and most pure pearls in the world. I mean, just incredible history behind each piece. And it's really cool because each piece she kept in its original box, and she labeled it according to the husband who had given it to her. And she treasured these pieces. I mean, it was more, and she had fun with them. If she was wearing the Krupp, which was her signature piece, and someone wanted to try it on, she would just take it off and let you try it on for fun. She enjoyed the jewelry. It wasn't snobby, which I also really love about her.
We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Kate, you've already done this once, so I came up with 5 new questions. And these are the questions that people like Mitch Daniels and other people get asked when they come on twice. Are you ready?
Oh, gosh.
They're just as harmless as the first ones, which,
okay.
Of course, I know you don't remember. All right. What was your first car?
I honestly can't. I think like a Taurus or something. I don't have hugely warm memories about it. It was just like an old.
Christopher Anderson bought you a Taurus?
It was not a great car, but it worked.
All those pictures of celebrities on his wall, and you got a Taurus?
Yeah, exactly.
If you could witness any sporting event in history, be there in person and watch it, which one would you choose?
Gosh, I just maybe, oh gosh, let me think. This is a tricky one. I would think I've never been to the US Open, so maybe like Serena Williams' last match would have been fun to go to. But I mean, I'll just go with that.
What is your choice for the funniest movie of all time?
These are really hard.
Now you know how those of us on the other side of the microphone feel when we're interviewed by folks like you.
Oh my gosh, this is so tricky. I might have to pass on that one because I don't know. I mean, I'm watching a lot of kids movies like Elf and stuff, so I can't think of a really great, funny movie off the top of my head.
I will say that I've asked this question about 5 times, and I have received the same answer all 5 times.
Which
National Lampoon's Animal House.
What, really?
Yeah. Mitch Daniels chose My Cousin Vinny as his number 2, which I thought was really funny. If you could solve any historical mystery, prove what's true or not true, which mystery would you choose?
I don't know. My gosh. I mean, how the Egyptians built the pyramids, I guess. I don't know.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. If you could go back, and it doesn't have to go back in time. Let me phrase it a different way. including living people. If you could box anyone's ears in history, whom would you choose?
Box anyone's ears?
Yeah, slap them, box their ears.
God. Oh, I mean, these are very hard questions. I mean, I guess I'll go with so you mean someone you really hate?
Yeah, and you could just slap them for all the things that you know that they've done. I'll tell you that all the Tudor Stuart historians all choose Henry VIII.
I was going to say, I just saw Six, the musical, and he is a jerk. I mean, I guess Hitler, right? If you're Hitler or Stalin, go with them.
One more question though. I love to ask this question of biographers who are chronicling someone who's not around. If you could ask Elizabeth Taylor one question, what would you have asked her?
I am curious why she didn't go to Montgomery Clift's funeral. And I would ask her that question because I would, the larger picture would have been like, what's your biggest regret? But I don't think she had a lot of regrets. And I don't think she was that introspective, but I never understood why she didn't go to his funeral. It's strange to me because they were so close.
That comes through in your book, how close they were. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest today has been Kate Andersen Brower. She is the author of Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon. It's an absolutely wonderful book, but if you don't take my word for it, how about Magic Johnson's? He calls her book, Brower's book took me back to the early days when Elizabeth fought so hard against the stigma surrounding people with HIV and AIDS. She lived by the credo, to whom much is giving, much is required. Her true nature is revealed here in these pages. It's a wonderful tribute about a wonderful tribute. Kate, thank you very much for coming on the podcast again.
Thank you so much. It was fun chatting with you, Robert.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.